after the meeting is concluded, and should anyone also wish to view it. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notifications or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. As a reminder, may I remind members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you wish to speak. Please could you also keep your microphone muted when not talking so there aren't any interruptions encountered. Moving on to the agenda, could Geraint, our Democratic Services Officer, confirm if we've received any apologies, please? Geraint.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we got apologies from councillors Cowles, Price, Tew, Thomas and Williams.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. Could I ask members present in alphabetical order to state whether they have any declarations of interest to declare? Councillor Best?
No interest to declare, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Jones? Janet Jones?
Yes, I'm a governor at Blaenavon Heritage. Yes, Chair, I'm a governor at Blaenavon Heritage School.
Thank you. I don't have any declarations that I'm aware of, although I do have 2 grandchildren at Escunguff and Glyndŵr, but I don't think we discuss in schools individually today. And Councillor Watkins?
Yeah, I'm a governor at Our Lady of the Angels School in Cwmbran.
And Victoria Haller.
Parent Governor at Yscol Pantig.
Thank you very much for that. That takes us to agenda item 3, which is why we're here, the consultation of the EAS Business Plan 2023 to 2025. Can I remind members that because this is a special committee meeting, there will be no reporting of minutes or actions arising from the previous meeting. This information will be reported on within our next ordinary meeting in May. The purpose of the EAS report today is to present and consult with members on their business plan for 2023 to 2025. May I welcome Ed Price and Jonathan John Keogh from the EAS and Andrew Powell's Deputy Director of Learning to the meeting, and along with Jason O'Brien. Thank you. I haven't got your designation, Jason, but we know who you are.
Strategic Director.
Thank you. Strategic Director for Education at the moment and Children's Services. Can I ask officers if they could provide members with a brief overview of the main points within the report? We should be brief, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Pranand R. Pawb, thank you, Committee, for agreeing to this special meeting to fit in with the timescales for consultation on the business plan. We appreciate your flexibility. I will be briefly just cover the report as opposed to the full Appendix A and B, but happy to take any questions at the end on any aspect of all 3 documents. So this is an update. It's an annual update. It's not quite annual, and I'll come on to that in a minute, because we already have a 3-year business plan across the region as your school improvement service, where we have a 3-year business plan which has been through the full scrutiny cabinet approval process. What this is an update to that 3-year plan, which is just coming to scrutiny for consultation. We are consulting currently with a wide range of head teacher groups, governor groups, through schools, through pupil voice as well, to inform the final version of this plan. This update to the plan has been constructed with colleagues in local authorities as well, so it's not just in isolation. It is designed to meet the strategic needs, strategic priorities of each of our 5 local authorities across the region. So the fact that it's not a 1-year plan, it's because this year there have been significant delays to finance from Welsh Government in terms of local authorities not knowing the contributions that they are able to make and the regional grants. Therefore, it's been agreed that this plan will start on the 1st of June as opposed to the usual 1st of April. We'd normally be consulting in January with you, not March as we are doing now. So the process has been delayed. That doesn't mean in any way whatsoever that we will not be working with schools in that interim period. The current business plan continues and the work still continues. So because it's so close to being, it would seem silly to have an 8-month plan, so it's been extended to the remainder of this year and next year as well. So it's a halfway point in the current 3-year business plan. So under 1.4, it's already underpinned by that current one. There is one purpose really for this plan now. It's to enable flexibility and change of direction to meet the needs of schools, learners in Torfaen, meet the needs of the council as the council changes priorities as well. That's why we have this design of this plan in. So it is subject to change under 1.5 once we know the final funding profiles, and I'll come on to that in the final section. In terms of last year and what we did, one of the things that was encouraged by all scrutiny committees, particularly this one last year, was more information to you. We have reported, I know Jonathan was here last week, we've made available value for money reports, we've made available stats and stories as they're colloquially known, but those reports on intent, implementation and impact, which have been available for September, January, and we're currently writing the April ones now. So whilst we don't have in the plan the evaluation of that work, it's included in those separate plans and procedures, and they have, along with the consultation, informed this plan in the work that we are doing. 2.3 is an important point in that we've returned to a partnership annex, which is the final couple of pages on Appendix A, the plan for this year, to specifically address those needs in Torfaen, which have been agreed with LA officers, and there is still work, because of the finance elements, to do on those, to work those up ready for that 1st of June start, but it's an important aspect. We know, under 2.5, we are not alone in being able to influence change. It is collaboration as part of a much wider system. We know many of you will be governors. It's about working with governors. It's about working with school leadership, LA officers and ourselves in partnership to effect change. Welsh Government recognise that as well in some of their enabling conditions for school improvement, which are reflected on in the plan and our priorities as well. That 2.6, I won't cover all those, but that, those 5 bullet points encompass what we are trying to impact change on in a complex system. They are, as I reflected on those Welsh Government priorities under 3.1, they've set out 8 contributory factors. They are in our business plan on page 27 and page 18, where we have our success criteria which align to those. If you have seen page 18 on the report, that's an important page in terms of the success criteria that we are aiming for, such as the progress learners make, reducing attainment gaps and the impact on vulnerable learners are absolutely critical, improving the quality of teaching, the impact of professional learning on practice in our schools. So we're developing different approaches to evaluation. We do not have answers to all of this, and I know in the past I've been to this committee and talked about the changing landscape in terms of we do not have the performance indicators in education that we once had, particularly in primary school and at Key Stage 3. There is no return to consistent measures from Welsh Government because that all reflects on the curriculum change that is in place, where there are local curricula for schools to determine and assess the ways in which their learners are making progress. There is going to be a nod to a return in the summer, and there was an announcement from the Minister in January where all Wales core data sets, we don't yet know what they will look like, will return for Key Stage 4 on a reduced set of measures. So we will have some data feeding into systems, and that is ultimately, I suppose, one of the key measures, an end game for learners, isn't it, at age 16. So implications before I move on to funding. You've noted that I've said that there is funding uncertainty, and that continues. In terms of how the AS is funded, it is funded from 2 main sources, 50% of the contribution from local authorities and 50% of the contribution from regional grants. The regional grant picture has changed considerably this year because it says regional grant, there is not one single grant. At one point, there were about 80 different grants into education. It has reduced considerably, but what Welsh Government do is, this year in particular, they have aligned some to local authorities, some to us, and almost swapped them around. So it is figuring out the picture there of what grants continue to fund what activity. We, as well, whilst we're 50% funded from grant, it's actually only 6% of the total amount of grant that comes to us. The other 94% is passported through to schools, to the front line, where it is most effective. So it's only the total quantum of grant is about 50 million across the region, but with specific criteria and on to schools. We're seeking to realign things whilst making a very, very strong commitment to protecting schools where that grant funding goes is key. So the company board, over the last 10 years under 4.3, have taken a range of steps to return efficiency savings. And if we look over the last 10 years from 2012, probably estimates about 2 to 3% efficiency savings each year from the local, offered up to local authorities and received. The local authorities have always taken them consistently as well. So each local authority in the region over the last 10 years has always agreed the same amount of efficiency saving. It doesn't sound a lot, 2 to 3% a year. It's probably, when you add those up, and I forget the right mathematical term, but the productive effect of all of those is probably about 40% over the terms of 10 years. This year, you will note from the table, it is a 10% cut across the board. I am calling it a cut probably for the first time, because it genuinely is, and I think everyone recognises that. It has been driven by some local authorities, by the needs of some local authorities more than others, not necessarily Torfaen in that basis. That's why when you look on the table on 4.7, it is still TBC for Torfaen, because we are exploring with officers ways in which there may be certain elements of buyback into additional services that would not be there, so that we can deliver more to Torfaen schools, because there's more contribution in, but we've still got to work that out, is what's key there, and similar position with Blaen and Gwent, but the other three have agreed 10% cuts across the board. It does represent a short-term solution, because if you deviate more from a consistent model, if you do that for another 5 years, you've got something that isn't a consistent model at the end of it, and then it's very, very difficult to deliver equitably, because particularly under the terms of the Welsh Government grants, our provision should be equitable to all schools in the region as well, and equitable teachers, all learners, as you would expect Welsh Government to want. So that's the finance position. Final element are the risks. I'm not going to cover all of them. I've covered the funding. I think the second one, that professional learning has a positive impact. We have, over the last year, in the lack of firmer data, we've rapidly increased the evaluation of our PL. So, for example, from September across the region, we have something like 6,500 evaluations from teachers through QR codes at the end of every session. That in itself is just a perception. But over time, we also have a system where 6 months later, those teachers are emailed again and asked, what impact did that have on your practice? How have you changed things in schools? How have you shared it with other teachers? So that will become powerful. Then, perhaps 6 months down the line again, you're asking the question, what impact does it have on your learners that your practice changes? So we are attempting to get more and more sophisticated on the feedback that we get. We do similar with governors. You'll see the governor PL evaluations that we have. Risks. I've covered that we're one part of a much wider system, helping the local authority meet its statutory obligation to promote high standards and monitor the quality of education across the local authority and in Torfaen schools. And it is absolutely right. I think that third one from the bottom, sometimes it is when the conditions are right in school that you can enable school improvement. If there are certain structural elements that are wrong, particularly related perhaps to staffing and leadership, it is more of a challenge, and you need that in place to support schools. And of course, it's our partners working with us, as we do and as we have in the construction of this business plan. So we're working on behalf of the local authority as School Improvement Service. So that's it from me, Chair, in terms of report. Hopefully a useful summary, and give you the opportunity to ask questions to Jonathan, myself, and there may be elements of the local authority as well, I'm sure.
Thank you very
Jonathan
much.
Barry,
Anybody wish to comment? No? Okay, we'll go straight into questions then. You'll be pleased to know we haven't got 30 today, we've got 17. So. And the first question I'll take, and it's a general comment really, not a question. It's disappointing to note that there is no self-evaluation or progress update towards the current EAS business plan for 2022. It would have been useful if members had this information to be able to determine progress or impact of value for money for last year. So that's a point that members made. So, Vicky, do you want to go into the second question, please? Yeah.
Really briefly, sorry. Thank you, Chair. There is a value for money report for last year. There will be a value for money report for this year, and we're more than happy for that value for money report to come to scrutiny. We're also more than happy for the stats and stories reports that we do on a termly basis, either to come together or to come, on a termly basis, if that be beneficial. To remind you of them, without being, repeating things, they cover a range of inputs into schools in Torfaen, impacts of work that we've done, the stats side of it, but there are also at least 2 short stories of school improvement progress of schools in Torfaen and 1 longitudinal story as well of a deeper impact dive into what's happened in schools.
Okay, thank you, Vicky.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my question is, has there been strong engagement from schools and from the local authority in compiling the plan?
Absolutely, at director level, through SUC, the South East Wales Consortia Directors Group, have heavily influenced the plan. In terms of head teachers and governors, we have the Head Teacher Strategy Group. They are represented by 4 Torfaen head teachers, and from other groups as well, from other local authorities, meet on a half-termly basis. And they have been consulted on the early drafts of this plan as well, and they have had the opportunity to consult with their groups within their local authorities, their associations, to feedback. The Governor Strategy Group have had the same.
Just to add, so in Appendix A, you'll see the LA specific elements, page 17 for Torfaen. So again, that's an explicit piece of work that we've developed with Jonathan, with Karen, our Principal School Improvement Partner. And it's been informed by the evaluation that Ed's been talking about, those stats and stories and the termly evaluations. We spoke in previous scrutiny how we're focusing on the quality of teaching and learning at the moment, looking at those forensic elements. And you'll see that's explicitly written in.
Just to add to that, in terms of the local authority contribution to the business plan as well, obviously there have been specific sessions and a specific focus on the business plan, but that relationship between the local authority and the AAS, and indeed between schools and the AAS, will have been continual over throughout the process as well, so it will almost have been organic as well in terms of the input of the plan.
Jane, do you want to take question 3?
Yes, thank you. This is to the local authority. Is the local authority confident that the priorities as set out in the business plan clearly reflects and aligns to our county plan objectives, service plan priorities, as well as ESTIN recommendations?
Yes, in short. So if we think of the county plan wellbeing objectives 1 and 2 specifically link to education and outcomes for children and young people. So thinking about in objective 1, it's the specific reference to learners gaining good results at Key Stage 4 that enable them to go on to education, employment and training. There's aspects in there about curriculum for Wales. In objective 2, there's links to the Welsh Education Strategic Plan. You'll see those directly referenced in the EAS business plan as well. So there's a real clear read across the 2. In terms of our inspection recommendations, so recommendation 1 is to improve the outcomes for learners, particularly in secondary schools. Again, that's a key focus in here. And where we've talked about the buyback of additional support, that's probably where we want to make that investment, because we recognise it's a recommendation. We wouldn't want any risks around our support to secondary schools.
I've got the next 3. So, question 4. The business the business plan looks good on paper, but how will it make a difference, and how will you monitor whether it's making a difference, and that's to both the EAS and the LA? Thank you.
If I give some examples of how we monitor as well, every aspect of our work, we do have an internal evaluation process. So part of that III, there are reports which follow a consistent model that feed back and feed into our processes internally. So they will feed back, and JEG, our joint executive group, of which officers are represented and your and cabinet member rep for education represented as well, have these reports put to them on a half-termly basis. In addition, this is where Jonathan may want to come in on the monthly meetings that you have as well between Andrew, yourselves, Karen.
Absolutely, thanks, Ed. So, as we discussed last time, Chair, when we met last week, that partnership meeting, that partnership level, that discussion that often happens between the local authority and the AS is something that's fundamental to making sure that that piece of paper comes to life. So, we meet on a monthly basis, formally meet on a monthly basis. I would say that we have touch points several times during the week. That dialogue is open and honest between the local authority and the EAS, and they're very proactive in making sure that within the schools at an appropriate time, making sure that any potential soft spots are addressed in an appropriate time, but also we celebrate the good things as well. So all of that comes to life in my work stream, and that's really strong in terms of partnership work between the local authority and the EAS.
It is a piece of paper, isn't it? It's got to be alive. Situations change week to week in schools, within the LA, as staffing changes, issues come to a head. So, again, we talked about the school development plan professional discussions that we regularly have with schools, the team around the school meetings. That's all about building in flexibility to change support, whether it's from LA staff or from EAS teams. This morning we were in one of our secondaries that's having regular multi-agency meetings. So it was EAS, it was the LA, it was Welsh Government, it was Estin. And as a result of that meeting, we're changing some of the ways that we support. So this is purely just a framework, and it's got to flex to the needs and the situations of schools.
And crucial, I know we mentioned this at last scrutiny as well, Chair, but crucial to this is that relationship, and that relationship between the local authority, between the AS, between the schools, and that relationship that enables us to be able to challenge one another and have those open and honest conversations as well. I know we focused upon that quite a bit in last scrutiny, but that's crucial to this as well, as an ability to challenge.
You'll notice from all of those indicators that they are all quite hard to quantify. Yep, hence the question, I imagine, in that it is not in the old days of 90% of learners achieving a level 4. We have to be quite open, and in the way that we measure things like changes of improvement in leadership and governance, we do, under evolving systems, to have a look at known numbers, shall we say, things that can be uncontested. So a governing body with lots of vacancies would immediately be a flag. Leadership, where we've got a turnover of head teacher of 4 head teachers in the last 2 years, would be flagged. So we're looking at things like that. But it does come to dialogue and judgments which are handled in those meetings, but they are also, because they are harder to, they're not aggregated up, shall we say, in ways that are presentable to scrutiny, because they are about people, the HR side of things as well at times, and some of the difficult decisions that need to be made as well. But at an operational level, as officers in the LA, we do have those tough decisions about those, and as Jonathan and Andrew have explained, act on them. Improved teaching and learning is ultimately, and Jonathan may well come in and hear on this, it's about the judgment that the school leadership make. It is not for us as an organisation to make judgments on the quality of teaching and learning within an individual school. It's for us to be assured that the school leadership can make accurate judgments about the quality of leadership in the school, inform the governing body, and the governing body take action. So again, we're looking at quantifying a system and the way in which a school works on that. If I look at learner progress has changed quite considerably as well. Learner progress, can anyone remember FFT data, Fisher Family Trust data, that was available? There were Welsh Government value-added statistics that were put out. Those are no longer published because then it's not possible to publish them. When we talk about learner progress, we are talking about looking in learner books over time in a school, books predominantly, listening to learners, talking to learners, and ensuring that the schools have ways of quantifying that upwards to come to sound judgments on the progress that learners are making. Our job is to ensure those systems are in place rather than to be looking at the aggregated data from those systems as we have in the past. I don't know whether colleagues want to add in any more on that or whether I've covered that.
Thank you. Just to build on the teaching and learning front, really, because that's my part of the organisation. And to start with, it builds on Jason's point again, it's the relationship. So we build that honest, open, trusting relationship where schools feel confident to say, look, this is really good, this is where we need help. That's the first part, because you can't improve until you know which area you need to improve upon. Then there's the professional discussions and the work around the SDP, as Ed and Andrew has picked out. But the point I want to make is, for me, it's about having a high-quality SIP workforce as well. So those SIPs receive good quality professional learning. So when they go into a school and they look at books, because it's a lot harder these days, it's harder for us, it's harder for you, it's harder for everybody without a common set of principles. It's making sure that SIPs can look at a set of books and see the journey that that child has been on and the individual child has been on, and then at the end of that process can make an accurate piece of paper, an accurate evaluation, that captures that work. And beyond that, then we've got a quality assurance role that the PSIP team, the Principal School Improvement Partner team, play to make sure that all of that work is consistent across the local authority. Every school's receiving that high quality support that it needs. And the very last point that builds on Ed's first one, I think this is about us working alongside schools to improve and not prove. So to help them to work on the softer spots that they've got so they can make those progress, make the progress forward. It's not us going in and completing mini inspections to prove or disprove something. So all of that's in place and it works effectively. That's fed into the local authority, and that often forms our discussion base then when we're in partnership meetings.
That's my next question, but the question is, are you confident that there is a shared responsibility between the LA and the consortium to find appropriate solutions which lead to improved outcomes for children, provide higher quality teaching and learning, and the strengthened capacity within our schools?
In a word, yes, absolutely. We've developed, as we've said, it's relationship again. We've developed a really open and honest relationship. It's not, we don't get together and everything's fine. You know, we ask those challenging questions, and that's right. We should be doing that both ways. You know, Andrew, within his capacity, will ask us about School X and what's going on, and what have we done, and in the same way, we challenge back in the true sense of a relationship. And as a result, I think, you know, we are seeing improvements across the schools within the local authority as a result of that strong partnership. I don't know if you want to come in there, Andrew.
I really enjoy the professional discussions that we have. There is that real challenge both ways, and it comes from the right place in that it's what's the right solution for this school, how are we going to improve the outcomes for those learners. And sometimes it is a bumpy route to the conclusion, but I think we always land on that we agree on the right response. I think it's a really healthy relationship.
Good, that's what.
Thank you very much. So my question is for the EAS, and the question is there sufficient capacity to provide all of our schools with the targeted actions you have defined set out at the end of Appendix A?
In terms of our capacity, you have to look at the model we have in place, I think, and it's a model that we've been evolving for a number of years, where we have school improvement partners who are ultimately the most experienced heads in the region, heads who can bring other things to schools, who work as part of Jonathan's SIP school improvement team. We also have, what until this business plan year, been called learning network schools, so schools that can offer areas of expertise in a broad range of topics, primary and secondary. So if it's history, in secondary schools, there would be a school of the 35 secondary schools in the region who would bid on an annual basis, be quality assured to check that they have the capacity to support other schools. That's one of the smaller examples of it. But that model in itself gives us capacity and flexibility as long as the funding is there to do it. We are always having schools come forward. Yes, there can be some of the smaller areas where we do perhaps have to cajole people and encourage and go, yes, you have got this expertise to share. What it also has the advantage of, it builds capacity within schools in the region, because, say, for example, the head teacher is out in Jonathan's team as a SIP, supporting 3 other schools. They're funded to do that, and then they can release their deputy head to actually be doing more leadership work rather than being in the classroom back at base when the head's not there, which increases and builds their capacity. Those are 2 small examples of the capacity building we do. Our role in the centre is predominantly looking at the brokerage and the quality assurance to making sure we have the right people there. And we do need people with the expertise for that, who, again, taken from the education pool that we have. And we're always bringing in new people, new ideas into that model.
And sometimes it hasn't worked, but we've recognised it and we've amended the sport. We've changed school improvement partners where it hasn't worked. It's not just a fixed model, is it? It's that constant review of what's the impact in the school. I can think of a few examples over the course of this year we've done that, and it's having the right impact. So.
Yeah, to add briefly to that point, and Jonathan may as well, that the SIP head teacher is a relationship ultimately, and not every SIP will work with every head teacher, and you do have to try new things. And when I say relationship, I don't mean a cosy relationship, but it certainly has to be trusting in that model, doesn't it? So that you are working, and there has to be challenge at times in that model, delivered in an appropriate way.
I think it's a good example of the earlier question of the plan coming from paper to life, and having that flexibility within the system, because schools are complex places, and a school could be okay one day and the next day you could have staff illness, you could have the head teachers gone off and done something else. So as Andrew said and Ed said, it's having that flex to not wait until it completely breaks, having that knowledge beforehand, then having the flex, and then having that team, as Ed said, and using our curriculum partners, the wider team, to go in who's got a specific set of expertise. So, for example, if a school is doing a job of work on digital, we have a curriculum partner who's highly skilled in digital, and we'll just broker him in at that point, who would support the school improvement partner to make sure that that school and the local authority and us are getting the end product of what we need to help everyone to move forward.
Next question is, within 4.4 of your report, read the budget. I go back a long way, like you, Ed. When the EAS was first established, it was envisaged that as the work of the EAS embedded and the impact of the work was being recognised within our schools, so the need would reduce, and therefore the budget. Is this still the case?
I think it was Steve Davis, who was the first managing director of that, who said, I will have done my job when we are out of business. It was a bit, sometimes called a Nanny McPhee effect as well with things. We are considerably smaller at the centre than we have ever been, and that has always been a deliberate direction of travel. When we look at the number of staff we had, which were 2 Peter Cross from the local authorities, I think it was 117 full-time equivalent. What we're actually at now is something like 56. So we have strategically got smaller. If I look at the Governor Support Service as an example, I think it was 18 staff, 2 Peter Cross. We're now down to 6. Deliberately and actually managing a service for more schools. So we've made things far more efficient as it is. Whether we will, that government support service would not go, because you need that central coordination of it rather than the clerks out at school. Other aspects of the service as well are currently, the direction of travel is that they are very much there for brokerage and quality assurance, which is essential as part of the service, I would say, but it's how much smaller it can go, I do not know.
Obviously, is it 10 years since the EAS has been in place? So it's recognising the improvement within our schools. I think the question was getting at, we're reducing the budget, but are we getting the results that we look
in terms of the capacity across our schools, and if you're asking me to evaluate back 10 years, I think there are far fewer surprises out in our schools across the region than there ever would have been at the start. In those first 2 years, we picked up, I'm not talking specifically Torfaen now, but we picked up significant challenges in a significant number of our schools. Those are significantly reduced. They are still there in our schools, but the variability in leadership and I think the expectations of our heads that we have across the region is to be part of a system rather than surprises emerging.
And I think it's really important we recognise the context across Torfaen at the moment. We've got one school in a statutory category. No other schools are in follow-up at the moment. That's a really positive picture.
And we haven't announced that yet.
Okay. But yeah, I think that we need to bear that context in mind. That's a really positive picture to be. Can't be complacent about it. It could change tomorrow. But currently, I'm really satisfied with it, that we know where the schools where there are issues, we're putting the right support in, and that we've seen positive change in a number of schools and schools coming out of statutory categories.
It's an ideal opportunity to congratulate the work that the officers have been doing and the EAS has been doing, and it's good news for YGG. So we're really pleased to hear that news. That was the embargo was yesterday, so well done. So question 9, Councillor Alfie Best.
Thank you, Chair. Are you receiving a sufficient amount of funding from the local authority to enable you to support and sustain school improvement within our schools appropriately? But also, I'd like to echo the Chair in congratulating you on YGG.
Okay. What I would say with the funding for this coming year is that we are going to manage with the funding that changes that have come from this year. There could be potential for similar in other LAs with their, not final decisions, but their direction for next year. That will be more challenging. I would say that beyond that year, if there were more cuts of a similar quantum, no, that would not be sustainable, is the line in the report, ultimately, as a service that we would get to small, ultimately, and underfunded to sustain with the same models that we have.
Thank you,
Just as a quick supplementary, does success of a school correlate to costs going down and a smaller budget? So as a school moves out of special measures?
So no, the funding basis and the funding basis that we were funded on from the LA was on need, was on originally the volume of schools within a local authority, with some socio-economic factors put in as well. There's nothing related to the changing picture of schools as it moves on, because it would be too complicated and too volatile, I would imagine, is the rationale behind that.
Great, thank you.
This is something we've talked about in directors, and there's that recognition that different LAs will have different needs at different times, and there's that recognition. Recently, Torfaen has needed additional support, so EAS resources come to Torfaen. Similarly, there will be other LAs that will need additional resources at other times. So we recognise there's got to be that flex in the model as well. It's a shared service. We've got to make sure that we're getting what we need, but we know at times it will adjust to where there's the greatest need in a particular LA. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Beth. Councillor Jane Watkins.
Thank you. Do you feel that there's an appropriate structure in place to enable effective partnership activity between the LA Consortium and schools?
I think our structures and ways of working as we've emerged from COVID have actually been quite stable in terms of the way we work, in terms of the monthly meetings that Jonathan and Andrew talked about, in terms of the structures we have of head teacher, governance strategy group, our governance groups. We are an organisation that likes to change things when they're not working, and we will reflect and change things. The fact that there is stability, I think, because some of these decisions are made by a wide range of colleagues, not just myself, the fact that there's stability in those models tells me that they're working. Otherwise, we'd have changed them. That's not to say they won't tweak and change, but generally our communication throughout the pandemic with LA officers, with schools, emerged and was strengthened. The fact that we can communicate with technology now, we're quite adept at having head teacher strategy, governance strategy groups that are 5 out of 6 per year, are done virtually, are done quickly, are done rapidly. We can communicate faster than ever with what we do. So yeah, I think the structures work well.
And if I could say that there's flex within those structures as well. So, you know, whilst there's the structures in place, as a result of some of the inspection findings within the local authority last year, there have been other structures that have been set up around, and as a result of that, like the Strategic Improvement Board, our Accelerate Improvement Group. So there are other structures, you know, that involve the EAS, involve the local authority, that can be flexed up and flexed down depending upon that level of need as well.
Thank you. Councillor Janet Jones, will you take the next 2 questions, please? Question 11 and 12.
Yes, Chair. Okay, thank you, Chair. Within Appendix A of the report, you have listed a number of assumptions and processes that should be put in place for each business plan priority. How will you know and evaluate if all of these processes have been put in place? And I'll wait for that answer, and then I'll go on to the next question, Chair.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Chair. What we will actually do, we will track those. So in the final version of the business plan, this will be converted, I won't bore you with the detail, but an Excel document where we'll track all of these assumptions, evaluate points in time on a quarterly basis usually, but more frequently. And we will track those, flag them with the relevant assistant director who would have dialogue with those partners where there were the ones which weren't being we felt were hampering progress and relationships.
Happy with that, Janet?
Yes, that's perfectly fine. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Second question is, improvements to self-evaluation processes appear to be a key feature within all ESDIN recommendations across the majority of schools at the present time. Are we confident the schools are being provided with the appropriate levels of support to improve on these processes going forward? And this applies to the EAS and local authority, please.
Okay, in terms of self-evaluation within schools, as opposed to our self-evaluation, the framework was changed a couple of years ago, so the requirement to have a self-evaluation document was removed. The only statutory document is actually the school development plan itself. What that doesn't mean is that schools can do away with self-evaluation. Self-evaluation should be an ongoing activity that is a critical component of their work to actually inform their school development plan and inform what they need to do. We undertake work in terms of professional learning for head teachers, middle leaders, senior leaders on self-evaluation work, but we will also undertake it on a bespoke level with those schools in need that need further support with their self-evaluation processes. Now, one of the challenges, very often in the past, self-evaluation activity used to perhaps too heavily focus on inspection area 1 standards. So your self-evaluation would be, we've got 95% level 4, tick. We're in benchmark Q1, all is good with the world. That wasn't necessarily the case, and it's a recognition, and this is a journey with our schools to get this right, that self-evaluation is an ongoing process that's multifaceted. So it's looking at books, it's listening to learners, it is observing lessons, it's undertaking learning walks, it's having governors do some of that activity as well, from a lay person's perspective. So what I would describe eyes on and and feet in schools to be looking at what's going on is the critical factor in all of that self-evaluation, and perhaps synthesising it in ways which isn't a self-evaluation document, but does contribute to the SDP. I don't know whether colleagues have got more to add to that or happy with that.
Go ahead.
I think the fact it keeps coming up in Estin recommendations mean we haven't done it right to date. It's really complicated by the change in the curriculum, so what we're particularly focusing on at the moment is how schools set their assessment criteria, and then how they monitor the impact of teaching and learning against these new assessment criteria. This is all brand new, so I think that it's like Ed says, we're moving away from that tick box model of you had percentage of 5 GCSEs A star to C. So it's developing the assessment and the evaluation model alongside with schools, which is really difficult. So we've got Professor Mick Waters at the moment working with clusters of school, so that so at least within a cluster there's a sharing of practice and about how the curriculum pathway will look for learners right from the start of primary to the end of secondary. But it's one of those things we just need to suck it and see. It's a developmental piece of work, but I think evaluation itself is really hard. It's really hard in the context of a changed curriculum and a new assessment model.
I think there's, it's a great question, and it's got many different answers. And I think the first thing I just want to make is that whenever there's a change, there's nervousness, and there's nervousness across the system. So if we think about the Estin element of it to start with, whenever I've been an Estin inspector, you always started with the school's self-evaluation report, and you scrutinised that before you stepped foot into the school, and that was part of the process. That doesn't exist anymore within the Estin system, because schools, as Ed said, no longer need to submit a self-evaluation report. So I think there's a nervousness there in terms of how Estin have now approached inspections, because it's a change. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just a change. But it comes down again to the school improvement partners building that relationship, getting into schools, working alongside the school leaders to really triangulate what's going on. So does that school leader understand where that school is at that point in time? And how do they know, importantly, it comes down to the first-hand evidence collection. Does that school leader know where they want to get to? And how soon do they want to get there? And how will they get there? And then, when they're there, did they get there? What was the strengths? What was the drawbacks? What needs to happen next? And I think this is where the professional relationship comes in. This is where that level of challenge across the system, this is where school improvement partners and principal school improvement partners then need to have those challenging but supportive conversations with head teachers if they don't agree with what the head teacher is saying is the main challenges within that school at that time. And that's the only way that we can truly and honestly move schools forward.
Thank you for your answers. Much appreciate the level that you've gone into in giving this information. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Janet. I think we need to include governors in that support as well. I remember doing book scrutiny and not having any training on what I'm supposed to be looking for.
I mean,
yeah.
That was one of the things we talked about in the last scrutiny meeting. And so as a result, for all the school development plan professional discussions that we've had since and going forward, the core question is how are governors involved in self-evaluation? Okay.
Yeah.
That's very good to hear, because we've heard from governors quite recently who weren't necessarily happy with their role or how seriously their role was being taken. We did assure them that we'd already scrutinised on that, but that we're going to continue to scrutinise on that, and they were pleased to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to come in with question 17 because it links to this?
I do, thank you, Chair. Because it links this, do we currently have strong engagement from our schools in developing the effective self-improvement school systems?
I think we have to look at the context of which our schools are working at the moment with some of the disputes that are in place. We as organisations completely recognise that those professionals are carrying those actions out within, with the approval of their representatives and unions. That's fine. Some of it does impact on engagement with school improvement, and we have to evaluate and monitor that. But there are many schools where it's not impacting on that as well. It is down to the decisions of individuals within the framework in which they're working. In terms of longer term, so taking that out of the equation, we do have systems for evaluating evaluating engagement with schools, particularly in terms of engagement with professional learning. That has to be nuanced and subtle, because there are some schools that don't need to be doing the same volume that other schools are doing with engagement with us. And the dialogue between LA and ourselves would identify schools where perhaps we're seeing a pattern of non-engagement, which is discussion with the head teacher through the frameworks we have. Discussion perhaps with, I think importantly, as you say, chairs of governors as well. The governors know that. We've restarted the governor report this year on an annual basis. It was previously the National Categorisation Report, which we had to do and deliver. That went away just before pandemic. We've restarted those because it's an important part which does tell governing bodies, with the SIP presenting, how we're working with schools, but also the engagement levels as well.
I've got question 13. How do we ensure collaborative school-to-school work is being monitored and evaluated carefully enough to ensure that the support is having the intended impact and not having a detrimental effect on the school providing the support? That's for the local authority.
It's fine. It's about quality assurance, isn't it? And again, those discussions. So we don't put a package of support into a school and assume it's going to work, because that would be dangerous. And again, it draws back to the earlier point about, on paper it could work. In the real world of the relationships, there could be a clash. So the first stage is we would agree what level of support is needed, and that would happen through professional discussion, partnership meetings, and if I draw you back to last week's meeting, we then have 3 options. So we've got the universal, the targeted, and the intensive. Based on what a school needs at that moment in time, we build the package of support, and we look for the Learning Network School partnership that we already have, with that wealth of evidence we have of our schools across the region and outside of the region, to see where we think a good match would happen. There's then a brokering process, because if the school's not engaged, the school that's going to be receiving support, if they're not engaged, then we may as well go back to the drawing board and look straight away. And that conversation's essential, because education's small. Education in Wales is smaller, and Welsh education's even smaller, and people have pre-existing relationships that sometimes we are not aware of. So we will have those conversations with the school that's going to be receiving the support. So their voice, that co-construction, comes through in every aspect. If we're all in agreement, we then broker that support. The support starts, it takes place, and then the SIP, if it's not attached to the support school or the principal school improvement partner, will then play a QA role, where they will go in, they would look at what's going on. There'd be a really tight success criteria and timelines in terms of what we expect to see and when we expect to see it. All of that's recorded on the notes of activity and on the single school plan overview. And we monitor that moving forward. That's where the partnership meetings then come in. And we always have targeted schools, and some of our higher tier schools, we'll have those discussions, both in partnership, in team around the school, in multi-agency meetings, and in internal team around the school meetings as well, to make sure that the support is fit for purpose at that time.
Just to add a couple of points to that, we've actually recognised over the last year that at times there can be too much support in a school as well. and perhaps too many voices within a school as well. So we're being carefully monitoring that as well. So if you've got a SIP, perhaps who's giving certain messages because that has worked well in the school that they're in, but within a department area, it's support from another school that does things in a different way that works perfectly well for them, but the two together don't align, that can be dangerous. There's also the recognition that it's too soon for a school as well, that if the leadership structures are not right, those enabling conditions are not right, there is no point, in a way, and this is a really hard moral decision to make, isn't it, to pile literacy support into that school when the leadership structures are not right to soak it up. There was a tiny little part of that, your question that we didn't answer, and that was detrimental effect on the delivering school. I think we have actually had to have conversations with delivering LNS schools that have said, you no longer have the capacity to deliver this support, therefore we'd like you to withdraw from that support. They're all very private conversations done with head teachers, but it is, and they're difficult conversations to have because no one wants to give up in that sort of role, do they? But we will have those tough conversations, say, we feel this is too much for you because things have moved on, things change. If you were delivering the history support I referred to later, but your head of history has moved on to another school, you're not going to be able to deliver the same level of support because your own capacity is down. So that has to be recognised. We sometimes recognise it on behalf of the schools and have the conversations.
Councillor Alfie Best, question 14.
Thank you, Chair. How will you ensure timely interventions will be provided to schools with rigour when they are failing to provide an acceptable standard of education?
So we have at least a termly check-in on things like progress against the SDP priorities, engagement in professional learning. We want a supported self-evaluation to take place in schools every term to look at an aspect of teaching and learning. So there are these regular checkpoints to monitor the progress of a school. That's from an EAS perspective. From an LA perspective, we'll look half-termly at the quality of the building, we'll look at attendance, we'll look at the number of exclusions that are taking place, we'll look at school finances. So we take these regular snapshots just to get a bit of a temperature gauge of what's happening across all of the school estate. And if there are queries that come out of that, we'll discuss it at the partnership meeting, then have a discussion with the school just to check, is our intelligence correct? And then what do we do as a result of it? And then is that bespoke support a challenge to that school? So I'm satisfied that there are a number of opportunities each half term actually just to take a snapshot of all schools and how are they functioning. There's also just the anecdotal data we'll pick up from schools, things like levels of sickness, head teachers phoning us and saying, I need a bit of help. And that's what we really want to encourage, that it's actually that there's a safe space to come forward and say, there's an issue in my school, can you help me before it gets any worse? So I feel we'll do that. We've got several examples of where that's happened this year. There is a risk that somebody may not want to engage or is trying to hide an issue, but I feel like we've got a decent network of intelligence around our school estate to pick up where issues are brewing.
Thank you.
I fully agree there with Andrew, and I think this question actually links back to the last question as well, so I'm not going to repeat what happened there. But again, it's that partnership working, and I'm thinking of examples where we've struggled to get into school. You can't intervene if you don't know, and we've struggled to break down those barriers. And in one example that I'm thinking of, that required a united front from the local authority and EAS officers to visit that school and say to that head teacher, we are coming in a supportive way, we're going to come and help you and work alongside you, but ultimately we're coming because it needs to happen. So I think we're prepared to take those difficult decisions as well if we don't get the buy-in in the natural way from schools.
Great, thank you both. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Best. Vicky, you have question 15.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is, within the Eston thematic report, which is a few years ago, on school-to-school support and collaboration, they stated that nearly most of the schools placed within statutory category at the time did not have a collaborative relationship. Those schools undertook collaborative working and were found to be high-performing schools. Can you confirm if all of the schools take the opportunity to work collaboratively and learn from each other, particularly when our schools are causing concern?
Yes, we've got good systems in place to allow that to happen. We've got best practice sharing events. We have the cluster work that's currently taking place with Professor Mick Waters, which every cluster, is signed up to across the local authority. The intention there is to bring them together after they've worked as individual clusters, to share that good practice around the wider clusters and then ultimately around the region. And again, it's that intelligence and sometimes if a school's been on a rocky journey and a rocky path, sometimes they need that little bit of a platform to celebrate the things that they are good at, and I think we do that well to bring them to the table to allow that to happen.
I think there's still variance in the way that clusters are working. Some are much more advanced than others. They are all working together, but some have just been doing it for longer. So, for example, we've got some clusters currently that are developing cluster attendance policies. Others are thinking about it. It all varies. But in terms of curriculum development, they are all engaged in this Mick Waters work, and I think that's positive. And that's including schools that have either been in or are in a statutory category.
Just care to add to that. It was to say, absolutely agree with the sentiment that it's vital. We restarted this work post-COVID. It was this time last year where we had brokered and arranged cluster conversations for a half a day at least with a whole cluster out. For many of the clusters within the area, reflecting across the region, there was huge variability in terms of some had managed to sustain relationships during the COVID period. Some had so much going on that they had to deal with that they weren't able to. That was the start this time last year of those conversations. For many, it was the first time post-COVID that some of those heads had actually physically met. Because they hadn't been able to during the COVID period. So that was the start of that work, which has now evolved and morphed into the Professor Mick Waters work that's ongoing. So it's been a year journey reinvigorating that.
Chair, sorry, just one more point. Yeah, just one more point. Because collaboration is essential. And you may remember back last week when we met, I talked about our desire to align SIPs to clusters as well, or at least to align SIPs to local authorities. So at this moment in time, we have SIPs who may work across four different local authorities across the region. And it's our intention to bring those SIPs exclusively into a local authority or exclusively into a cluster if we can, because that's going to help with the collaboration. It comes down to the too many voices. We're reducing the voices, but we're making that message stronger. And I think that's really going to help as well to bring that collaboration together.
You'll be pleased to hear the final question is Councillor Watkins.
Thank you. Following on from that question, do our schools value this collaborative way of working, and do they make best use of the expertise and skills available within the local system?
Yeah, I believe that our schools do value collaborative working. It is like everything. There are lots and lots of priorities for schools, aren't they? And sometimes collaborative working is harder to manage and harder to arrange than doing things in isolation. It is in any organisation, any business. Therefore, they need support at times to be keeping that on the boil and moving forward. What we are exploring next year as well is the idea of a cluster convener. So we're exploring how that can be done within the school so that you have someone that's not a head teacher but someone operationally that is doing the logistics, keeping things on the boil, keeping track of actions that people need. Because if it's collaborative working, no one's the boss, if that makes sense. So it's hard then to be tracking actions, but a cluster convener role is one that we're exploring currently within the business plan. It's not explicit in there because we're working at how to achieve it through the grants to keep that collaborative working moving and ticking over.
Head teachers are a headstrong lot. Okay. They're in charge of their own schools. And I had a conversation last week where we talked about cluster working. One of our clusters where we've got a number of really strong, very capable head teachers. And the head was saying how, I'm going to say they, so they're not even gender identified, they really valued working with each other, but at times it was so frustrating because they just wanted to do their own thing. I think we need to recognise that it has to be that independence of the school, but they can still value the conversation of colleagues and the challenge of colleagues, even if they're not necessarily going to change their own practice. And if there was something that was particularly poor in ways of practice, we would challenge, but we have to recognise that autonomy of individual schools as well as trying to corral them into a cluster on an LA way of working, which can be challenging. Okay.
It can also be valued with, you know, the cluster work that is being done with transition. Yeah. I mean, absolutely.
I think Andrew's reading my notepad because I've literally put that down because yes, it works, and the head teachers would tell us if it didn't work. They're not shy in saying, and that's the right thing. You know, they are the ones who are executing it. I think this is about us, the Royal us here, facilitating these discussions, giving a platform, giving them the opportunity. There was a phrase introduced into Welsh education a few years back that was sector leading, and it was a phrase that changed culture because it almost made the head teachers not want to share what was going on, because as soon as it was happening in the school down the road, it wasn't sector leading, and if Estyn hadn't tested that out at that point, you weren't the sector leading one. Even if it was your idea, it's the school down the road. So I think, you know, we're changing the hearts and minds here and the culture to say it's okay to share, and actually it's really positive to share. And it's never been more essentially important, as we discussed earlier on, with the curriculum change, with the removal of end of key stage measures. We need to be confident that every child leaving a primary school that feeds into a secondary school is getting a consistent and high quality education. So that collaboration and cluster work's never been more important. So I think we facilitate it well. I think the buy-in has been really good from head teachers and other staff across the school. It's not just the head teachers. And I think, you know, there's still a job of work to do, but I think the passion exists within the headship, within the local authority to do that work.
Okay, can I just have a supplementary? So you said about the cluster conveners. Have we seen that working in other authorities or in other areas? Has that been tried before?
We're not aware of it elsewhere, but it's been tried in different contexts. I forget the exact one, but we've had grant before, the Welsh Education Grant, which had a central point and a central person part funded to coordinate the use of that grant on a small. So we've looked at it on a smaller scale, and it worked very effectively, as opposed to elsewhere. I think it was the Welsh grant. I can't, but something like that.
I'd just like to add, I think clusters are so important, particularly with the community work, because, you know, teachers don't just teach them and then they leave school, they follow them outside of school, and it's good to have that cluster working so that you've got that follow-up, and so well done. That brings us to the end of our questions. No elected member have any supplementaries that they want to add before I ask the officers to leave? No? Thank you very much.
No.
I thank you for your attendance and your contributions to the meeting today.
Thank you.
And we'll deliberate on our recommendations. Thank you. may I remind members what's been asked of the Scrutiny Committee to consider when coming up with their recommendations. Members have been asked to receive the business plan report for 23-25 and take the opportunity to provide comments as part of the consultation process, to consider the main strengths and areas for development within the Torfaen, and to consider how LA services can be aligned with the priorities contained within the business plan. Members have any specific recommendations that they would like to make on this report? I think this report goes to council, doesn't it, in next council for acceptance. But yeah. Did I hear somebody saying chair? No.
No.
Okay. I'd like to know a little bit more about the cluster work and the what was his name?
Yeah.
Professor McWaters. I don't know whether...
yeah, they have mentioned that before.
It's relatively new. It wasn't in the report, but,
No,
you know...
they
I
have
think...
they have mentioned it before, but not in great detail.
No. And whether that's a recommendation, I don't know. But did you pick up on any recommendations?
I don't think
Yeah.
it's a
Chair?
Is it on? Am I on? Yeah. Sorry, no, I think that's more a request for information about the cluster working, Chair.
Yeah.
Obviously, at the beginning of the meeting, Ed Price, he did offer to provide the committee with following information, the value for money report, which I think will be good for you to have access to. And also the terms...
Sorry, you did say the value for money reports were available from this year and last year, so do we want to see both of them?
I think that would be a good idea, so you could have some sort of comparison.
Yes.
And obviously the term leaves stats and stories of the impacts of the work that they're carrying out within the schools. It might be useful just for you to have that information. And obviously, you know, if this is going to be provided on a termly basis, you can consider, you know, as a committee on your own, whether the termly stats and stories that are coming out of those reports are still sort of relevant and appropriate to the annual business plan. And, you know, if you've got any concerns, we can deal with it that way. But apart from specific recommendations, I haven't got anything particularly. I mean, I think we did discuss in pre-agenda yesterday that you welcome the opportunity really to be consulted upon and to be able to provide comments on the business plan for 23-25. It would have been nice if you could have had a sort of progress update for last year, so you'd sort of have something to compare against.
That's a recommendation in itself, if we can, for next...
Going forward.
Going forward.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good recommendation to receive the progress reports. Okay.
And that's about it, really. So if members...
You're happy with that, members? I think our recommendation...
Yes,
sorry,
sure.
Jane. I think our recommendation should go that we recommend it to council. But Jane's got a...
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a recommendation or a question or what it is, but, you know, Ed mentioned near the end about the cluster convener. Obviously, that's a new thing they're exploring. Don't know, can we recommend that they keep us informed or that we get information with how that
I think that'll go with my point as well.
is working? Yeah.
Thinking about it, Chair, you know, you're saying that you want to recommend that this report goes to council. I think it'll probably go to Cabinet, but this is just an opportunity now for you as a scrutiny committee to provide your sort of comments as part of the consult. This is, in effect, a consultation process.
I was under the understanding that each council took it through. But there we are. I might be wrong. We did last time because...
That's it, no. Does it only say on here about us recommend?
I think the EAS business plan went to council last time because when it went to council, we sent it back because we hadn't seen it. 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
That was the
Ed said at the beginning, didn't he? At the beginning of the report, what's the word in they've used? That's the business plan in its entirety. This is just for the period.
So the update doesn't go to council, right?
No,
Okay.
yeah.
Right, okay.
So it might be, in actual fact, I'll probably liaise with Ed outside of, after this committee, if you don't mind, members, because it might be that our recommendations will feed on to the consultation. I think they provided a link for you to put your responses on. And it may be, if you like, I'll circulate that round to you all, just in case there's anything else that you want to add as part of the consultation process.
One of the recommendations came within the question of including governors on question 12, I think it was. We asked a question about the improvement processes. Was it improvement self-evaluation processes? They didn't include support to governors. So that can be an official recommendation, I would think, that governors receive support on self-evaluation and actually exercises to go into it, like book scrutiny and things like that.
Yeah.
Are you going to word that? Yeah?
Yeah.
Good.
I'm already doing that, Chair. The book scrutiny up at Glenavon Heritage School, I've already been in to do book scrutiny.
Yeah.
It's very worthwhile.
Yeah, many years ago I did it as well, Janet, but we didn't have any training on it as governors. It was just, right, we're going to do some book scrutiny, which governors are available to do it. So it's about the EAS supplying the governor training and the support for governors, I think.
Definitely, yeah, totally agree with that, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, do we have anything else to consider, anyone? I don't want to keep you any longer than we have to. You okay with that, Leanne? Yeah. Okay. So the dates and times of the next meeting. I remind members that our next meeting is scheduled for the 4th of May and relates to the 21st Century Schools programme. That is, unless anything else emerges in the meantime. I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you ever so much for your attendance, and thanks the minimum education members for attending, which has been a very good scrutiny again. So thanks very much. I now close the meeting.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank